I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. This edition of Conversations with Al McFarlane is brought to you by Comcast, working to bridge the digital divide through Internet essentials and partnering with organizations across Twin Cities to help make our region an even better place to live, work, and play. I'm pleased to have as my guest today Rubén Vásquez. Rubén Vásquez. Rubén Vásquez is the Vice President for Racial Justice and Public Policy at the YWCA of Minneapolis. It's a great organization and a great challenge. Let me tell you a little bit about him. I'm sort of reading from his bio, if you let me do that, Rubén.
For sure.
Vice President of Racial Justice and Public Policy at YWCA Minneapolis, responsible for overall leadership and strategy for YWCA Minneapolis's race equity and public policy programs in support of the Y's mission, vision, and goals, and particularly in the areas of quality program and event delivery, of program development, implementation and evaluation, budget development, and management. He represents the Y on racial justice and public policy issues, both locally and nationally. He joined the Y in November of 17 as the racial equity and public policy strategist, and he joined to provide strategic leadership, proactively built community partnerships, and to manage seamless integration of the Y Minneapolis's race equity initiatives among partners and members. He came to this country from Mexico some 35 years ago. You've been committed, Rubén, in working to support, serve, identify, uplift under and unrepresented communities, helping our people become primary stakeholders in our communities. Your philosophy is that diversity is what makes us different, and inclusion is how we incorporate those differences to yield stronger organizations and I think stronger people as well. You've got a master's degree in public administration from Hamline University and a certificate in global arbitration law and practice from Hamline Law School and Queen Mary University in London. You are an active member in a number of organizations in Twin Cities. You and your wife married 15 years, right? 2 children, ages 13 and 10, and you live in New Brighton. Correct. That's the story.
That is the
and
story.
You're sticking to it, right?
I'm sticking to it.
Listen, thank you so much for being here, and thanks to the Y for its bold and forward-thinking leadership, creating a discussion, changing the narrative about race, diversity, and inclusion. But when the question comes up, what's the elevator speech? Why are we doing this work?
So why are we doing this work? I think the reason why we're doing this work is because, especially in our current political climate, I think this work is no longer something that is a nice thing to do, but it's a must thing to do, right? Our mission is, like you said, it's a bold mission. It is a big mission. It is to eliminate racism. It is to empower women and young girls. And we recognize that that is a big, bold mission, but it is a mission that I personally feel that it is attainable through, we use different strategies to get to that point. But really it's about getting to a point of having conversations that must be had at this point, where before it was more of a nice thing to do, and now it's a must thing to do.
Actually, before it was, don't talk about it.
Don't talk about it.
Don't talk about it.
It was a nice thing to do specifically within communities of colors, and within communities of colors, as a person of color, it was something that we kept on pushing, but the dominant community kept on kind of be like, we're okay, we're good, we elected a black president, we got there, right?
And in fact, the challenge was that when we pointed out instances of inequity, of unfairness that we perceived as consistent, apparent, and structural, we often were met with denials saying that that was an individual instance,
Right.
one bad actor, one bad situation, but never linking the continuum
Right.
of negative energy that served in total to consistently derail our inclusion and our involvement and diminish our sense of dignity.
Or it was also seen as something that maybe it was something that you did wrong.
That's right.
That you put yourself in that situation. If you would have done it this other way, you would have been okay, right? You know, as an example, something that happened to me personally a few years ago, 4 years ago actually, on the 4th of July, my family and I were visiting Michigan on the 4th of July, and you know, it's part of me that immediately when I walk in, I start scanning the room to see who else looks like me, right? Am I really, really the only person? And that's one of the things I did here, and it was the outdoors. And immediately I realized I was the only person of color in the crowd, in this crowd. I just happened to be wearing a T-shirt that said Mexico. Didn't even think anything of it, right? But it was because I was wearing that T-shirt that said Mexico that I was pulled out of the crowd by immigration.
Just like that. Oh, boy.
And started being questioned as to my legal status, my criminal history, my employment, you know, why I married the person I married, if it was because of papers. I mean, all of these things, right? After that whole awful, awful experience, my 10-year-old son was with me at that point, and he literally asked me on the spot was, Papa, why is this happening? My response to him was, because I'm brown, right? And the officer said, are you insinuating that I'm racially profiling you? And I said, no, actually I'm not. I'm stating a fact, right? And his thing is, well, it's because you're wearing that T-shirt. So it was my fault that I was wearing the T-shirt, right?
Right.
And my thing is, if I live in a country that is
horrible.
free, right?
Yeah.
Why is this an issue? And if my T-shirt would have said something other than Mexico, if it would have said Poland, Germany, France, would I have been pulled out of that crowd, right? So it's not just about that there's a lot of times when these people see this as individual incidents, but more often than not, they blame the victim for being in the wrong spot at the wrong time.
So how does an organization like the YW, first of all, adopt the strategy, the attitude, the commitment to tackle this thing head on and to tackle it boldly? That's number one.
Yeah.
And then secondly, how do you internalize that so that the organization itself reflects the intent and the desire? Because the same problems that are out in community are in every organization and every family, you know.
Yeah, so that is an excellent question. And, you know, obviously when I came on board and took on this role, you know, in January of 2018, that was one of the first things I started figuring out. It's like, it's not enough to have these conversations externally and with community, but how are we having those conversations internally? How are we engaging our staff so that our staff understands that whether it's all the way from the top, whether it's the president and CEO or the chair of the board, all the way down to the person who's checking in our members at the front desk, do they really see themselves as being part of the mission, or are they just going on a day-to-day basis doing their job, right? So for me and my team, we have been very intentional and very strategic about how do we start embedding the mission, not just externally, but more importantly, internally, so that everybody within the organization understands that when they come into work every day, they are working towards that mission of eliminating racism and empowering women, and not just coming in to collect a paycheck.
And so the embedding then becomes sort of a double activity to embed within the organization, but the effective embedding in the organization means that there has to be effective embedding and adoption by the individuals, by the staff, so that the people who work there truly understand and reflect and vocalize, verbalize, and they walk and talk in ways that reflect the practices that suggest the setting aside of those things that have been historically.
Yeah, and you know, it obviously it's, you know, it's not an easy thing to do. You know, going against the grain or going against the status quo is not always a popular thing to do. But, like I said at the beginning, it is time for us we must start having these conversations and understand when we're talking about racial justice, what do we mean by that? What does that look like? What is your role in that mission? Whether you are a person of color, whether you are a white person, whether you are the chair of the board, whether you are the front desk person, what is all that? What role do you play in that? So, for us, it's really more about how do we start embedding that mission internally? Because my belief is that once we start embedding it internally, that will then yield more results externally.
And so when I hear you say external results, I think about driving past some of your buildings, and I see this bold declaration of eliminating racism. I say, dang, they're really saying, just to say it is huge. And if you're doing it too, that's even better. But to say it in an environment that in the past said, shh, we don't talk about this. It's not us. We're liberals. We're Minnesotans, and we're nice.
It's Minnesota nice.
Yeah. And so I think that's bold. So what impact do you seek, and what are you discovering that the move is having on the business environment, the social service environment, all those elements that make up the ecosystem that ultimately form the ability to have people be living free from discrimination and from racism?
So the impact that we want to create is to build awareness. One of the things I tell my team is our job is to build awareness, but it's also to push people out of their comfort zone, right? How do we start having these conversations out in the community where these conversations, like you said, right, have really never been had because it makes people feel uncomfortable. I get it. It's an uncomfortable thing to do. But our work is uncomfortable when we're talking about racial justice, right? It is not an easy thing to do. So for us, is the impact that we're trying to create is that build that awareness out in the community, whether it's with community members, with business leaders, with other organizations, is to say, you are a part of this community. What role do you play in helping to eliminate racism, right? Whether you are a player in continuing to perpetuate that racism or whether you are a player in trying to eliminate it. Pushing those individuals to see what role they play in, right? Again, I, as a person of color, as an immigrant, as somebody who used to be undocumented when I first moved to this country, I understand that firsthand what it's like, right? I came here when I was in 4th grade. It wasn't until the 9th grade that I was allowed to have friends over my house because of that fear, right? So what role is the system playing to continue to perpetuate those systems of oppression and that racist system that we live in right now? So our goal is to advocate, to build the awareness, and to push people for them to understand what role do they play and how can we as a collective move forward together.
We're down to the last minute or so, Rubén Vásquez, but I want to focus on Rubén and your story. And think back, you said you came here when you were 4 years old. What was your dream of what your life could be, what your new country would be, and what role you'd play in that?
So when I came here, I was in 4th grade. I was 10 years old.
Okay, 4th grade.
Yeah. And really, it was, my parents came here. They brought us here because they felt that this was a better environment for us. I remember seeing snow for the first time in December of 1979, right? And for me, I remember, and I tell my kids the story now, is the first day of school, when I was enrolled in school, at the end of that, I didn't speak a word of English. And the very first thing I learned in English were A, B, C, D. And I remember being so proud of that. I came home and I was telling my mom, like, hey, I know how to speak English because I could say 4 letters. Sure. Right? So for me, it was about being a part of a community that accepts me for who I am, right? And not being, having to hide. because like I said, for so many years, we had all of these rules at home, right? My parents never went to a parent-teacher conference from fear of that authority figure.
Sure.
If there was an issue going on, we could never call the police because of that authority figure. So for me, my goal, my dream is how do we get to a place where we do live in an equitable community, where everybody's treated equal, right? Again, we're not necessarily asking for a handout. We're just asking for the opportunity to become better, to be here.
ourselves.
Be ourselves.
To be our
right?
authentic
Exactly.
selves.
Exactly.
Yeah. Listen, Rubén Vásquez, you are Vice President for Racial Justice and Public Policy at YWCA in Minneapolis. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your story. I think it's an important story, a powerful story, and I think the organization is absolutely right for taking the stand it's taking, and continued success in all that you do.
Thank you so much.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time.